HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
If someone has the courage to come to you and give you feedback that is honest and respectful, they're not doing it in most cases to blow you up. They're doing it because they want you to succeed. They want you to be a great boss, a great colleague. And if we could wrap our heads around that and assume that was the intention of feedback, less so than it was to derail us or just criticize us and leave us there, helpless, I think that we would be potentially better consumers of it.
Welcome to the People Managing People podcast. We're on a mission to build a better world of work and to help you build happy and productive workplaces. I'm your host, Tim Reitsma, and today on the show, Thomas Giles, founder of a consultancy called TGC, and I talk about kindness. And no, kindness isn't just about being nice. We will walk you through the 4 conditions that enable genuine kindness and how you can start or continue on your path to being genuinely kind. So stay tuned. Welcome, Thomas, to the People Managing People podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here, and I'm excited to dive into our conversation today about your recent book, Genuine Kindness. But thanks again for taking the time to join me.
I'm really pleased to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about your book, and as I mentioned off the top, or actually before we hit record, I have to say it's probably one of my favorite books I've read in such a long time. And so it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, and impactful. So thanks for writing something so great.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the endorsement. It was a labor of love. It was a message, something I wanted to say and get out there. So I'm glad it resonated.
That's great. Well, we're going to get into it in a few minutes here, but before we get into talking about the book, let us know a little bit about yourself and what you're up to these days.
Yeah. So I, 10 years ago, started a organizational development consultancy, and that came after about 25 years of working for organizations as an HR business partner and an internal OD consultant. And at the end of my last employed gig, I got a break and had some time to think about things and what I really wanted to do next. And I felt my calling, or where I could be most helpful, was in the form of a consultant that could work with organizations and help their leaders, their teams, and individuals really realize their professional ambitions through various, concepts about how to work with each other, how to use honesty, listening skills, coaching. So I started that 10 years ago, and it's been never looked back. It's been great. And I've had the ability to work not just in the US, but in the United Kingdom, the EU, kind of Latin America, the Middle East, Asia. So it's just been a really wonderful experience for the last almost 10 years now of doing this and kind of working with people. We're a small team. There are 4 of us in the US, and then we have an affiliate consultant who's based in England. And,
Wow.
The pandemic slowed us down a little bit, but we're coming back in full form. And, the pandemic gave me an opportunity to kind of drill down on the book and get that finished and get that out and published, which we did about 2 months ago. It hit Amazon and it was ready to go. So.
Well, congrats on that. I know that's a big milestone and a big undertaking, writing a book. It's not a small feat, but also making that shift from, corporate work into consulting. So a lot of change over the last 10 years.
Yeah, it has been a lot of change, but it's all been good.
That's exciting. And, you've mentioned that you've held various leadership positions working as an HR business partner and such. And I'm really curious. I ask all my guests this question. What does it mean to be a leader?
I think that, to me, I'll use an analogy that I use with clients in leadership training classes. Fundamentally, leadership to me is, I liken it to being sort of a conductor of a symphony or a band leader. And you're not you're going into a concert and you've got to make great music that people will love and enjoy and be enthusiastic and maybe download your songs later or buy CDs if you still do that. But you can't, as a conductor or band leader, play every instrument and make that music. In most cases, there are a few exceptional artists out there that can play a guitar and can sing. But I think what you have to do is identify great talent, bring them together, help them learn how to work together, and to ultimately harmonize and come out with something that's amazing, and to create a significant and valuable experience for them and for the audience that is listening to the music. So I think great leadership is really is doing that. I think a lot of managers have I'll call it a misconception that, being really good is being a subject matter expert or doing a lot of things themselves. And I believe the thing that they need to be most expert in is how to identify and influence and motivate and inspire people and teams and bringing them together to do great things and to have mutual achievement and success.
Yeah, it's like you said, there's that misconception, that leader needs to be
Yeah.
that subject matter expert. And often I've seen in companies I've worked at or consulted with is, oh, you're a great subject matter expert, so now you're a leader. Now you're taking on leadership of a team. And it's a shift. It's like, okay, I'm not in the weeds, so to speak, in the day-to-day, but like
Yeah.
you said, identifying the talent and coaching your talent. And it's less in the project, in the weeds, but more on the business.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. There was another podcast on Freakonomics about a month or so ago where they were interviewing people who were promoted into leadership roles because of their subject matter expertise. And then they failed classically. And all of them, were honest and admitted that actually they felt that the only way they could get ahead was becoming a leader, but they actually wanted, they were quite happy kind of working on their own and being an individual contributor and being led by somebody else. So I think we have, the criteria for leadership, kind of, what gets you to punch your card and get to do that. There's a lot of misconceptions about that. I think we're moving away from it, but there's still some lingering belief that if you're a great software engineer, you'll be a great director of engineering. And that's not necessarily true. It may not be what that software engineer wants to do. I think there's beginning to be a reckoning around kind of what is leadership and what are you actually asking leaders to do? And it's less about being a technical expert and more someone who is able to inspire people and the people that want to follow and who can be made to feel safe by an individual.
It's such an important thing to note is, somebody who you want to follow, that
Yes.
you're excited to follow, that inspires you, but also challenges you. And it plays really nicely into the book and into the definition even of genuine kindness. Before we get there, another question I ask all my guests, and maybe it's a little bit of selfish reasons on my part, but we landed on this a while ago here at People Managing People, the phrase "build a better world of work." And when you hear that phrase, what comes to mind?
Yeah, that phrase really resonated with me as I was thinking about our conversation today and my book and why I wrote the book. I had a great career working for other organizations. I worked for some really wonderful, cool people. I, had great colleagues, some of whom have become my lifelong friends. I'm very proud of that. But I also had experiences where things were rough. There were a lot of politics, a lot of gossip, a lot of, insincerity and manipulation. And as you've read the book, I got caught up in it, and I, completely honest, testify that I was a participant at times in this uncivil, disrespectful behavior that went on. I think, we're in such a polarized state in general in society, and that's global society. We're coming off of at least I hope we're coming off of a pandemic. We've seen enormous social unrest globally. We've got this situation in Europe right now between the Ukraine and Russia. It's just things are tough and they're polarized. And I think that we can start in the workplace by learning how to be kinder to each other and more respectful. and really dispensing with some of the, what, get called office politics, but some of the aberrant behaviors that people engage in at work, and what end up being in some cases really cruel things that they do to their colleagues, all in the name of getting results, or asserting influence, or leading poorly. I think that, moving away from that and having a reckoning that there's got to be a kinder, more respectful way to work with each other, and then really committing to that and holding each other accountable to that. That's, I think, how I kind of think about that, and what the opportunity is in front of all of us at this point in time relative to the workplace.
I love that you said, be kind and respectful. And, the thing that pops in my mind is, okay, how do we do this on a day to day? Or how do we, if we're working with someone or for someone who isn't kind and respectful, what do
Yeah.
we do? How do we approach this aside from, I'm going to go look for another job?
Well, that in the final analysis, that a lot of the research I did for the book showed that, disrespectful or unkind behavior that was encountered at work, experienced, was a major driver of disengagement and ultimately turnover and loss of valuable talent. So that does happen. And I think that it really starts with people, recognizing that in 2022, we need to rethink how we do things together, how we collaborate, why we come to work. The virtual work environment that has become very prevalent, and I think will survive at a much greater degree than it was in 2019. I think it's going to require a new script and a new template about how we do this. And I think that, if you're working for someone who is being disrespectful or is being unkind, or actually cruel, it's, you can always just, simply say to them, what's going on? Here's what I've noticed, and here's how I experience it, and what's causing this, what's making you want to work this way, because I would like to work with you differently. And I see, in spite of this, a lot of value in our collaboration, but I'm experiencing this, and it's not okay. It's not fair. And it requires a little bit of courage, I think, to have that conversation. And the first time you do it, it's probably not poetic, but I think if more people would be willing to have those conversations, especially early on when they experience this, I think they could begin to change the dynamic. There are some people who engage in tough behaviors with each other, with other people at work, who I don't know that they're entirely self-aware that they're doing that. And the
Hmm.
first time someone actually speaks up and says something to them, we call it in executive coaching the aha moment, where a light bulb goes on. And it's like, wow, no one ever said that to me, and I never realized that this is how it was landing with them. And I need to rethink that, and I think that there are more opportunities than not for people to have those experiences if someone would be, willing to step up and, in a very kind and thoughtful way, let them know how they're landing and how it's not okay, and that they wish they do things differently.
It takes a lot of courage. As you're talking, I'm going, "Oh, I don't know. Like that's a hard conversation, but such an important conversation. Because often, I think we're programmed to, oh, there's just another job, or we just have to deal with it, or just put up with it. But, would we put up with that type of behavior in our household or with our friends, or, you name it. But so why is it different in the workplace? And I think that's the narrative that we're shifting, and we need to continue to shift.
It, it's tough. And sometimes the universe puts an opportunity in front of you. I had a boss who was really tough to work for, and it could be really unpleasant. And my colleagues and I all experienced it, and we commiserated, which was not probably the best way to deal with it. But sometimes you just need to talk to someone about a tough experience. And one of these individuals then decided they were going to tell her what we were all saying about her to each other. So there was a meeting that I had with her, and it was very awkward. And she said to me point blank, she said, and such said that you don't like working for me. And she looked at me, and this fierce look. And in that moment, I thought, you know what? I have nothing to lose at this point. So I said, yeah, I did kind of say that. I said, you are difficult to work for. And she took a really deep breath, and she said, I know. And I want to do things differently. And I said, that's great, because I would love nothing more. There's so many good things about you and your intellect and your experience and strategic views that we all benefit from in spite of the other stuff that's been going on. I would welcome that. How can I help you? What do you need from me to help you, think about this and to be different in a way that you aspire towards? So
Mm,
you can do it, but it is not easy. But I think the only way we're going to shift the needle on this is for people being willing to speak up.
mhm. Well, I think it's a good lead into the book, and I think before we even dive into that, let's define what genuine kindness actually is. It's like when I was thinking about it, kindness, the first thought that popped in my mind is like, oh, a kind person, you're nice. But I'd love to hear from you. What is the definition?
Yeah. So I have a client that I'm currently working with on a multi-year engagement around their culture and their employee experience and engagement and leadership development. And one of the managers in a training session, this concept of genuine kindness came up. And before I could even really explain what I meant by it, he got frustrated with me. He said, well, you just want us all to go around and give each other a hug. Do you think that will fix everything? And I laughed and I said, I wish it were that easy. If that's all we had to do, I expect more people would do it. But that isn't what I mean. Genuine kindness is really, being fundamentally very respectful, very considerate, very open-minded, and really approaching, particularly in leadership, but even in collaboration with peers and individuals, really working towards a way that is, still holds people accountable, still it can be driven, may have to make hard decisions sometimes, including maybe even asking someone to leave an organization who's not fitting in or succeeding, but it's doing it in a way that doesn't just, is not, is honest fundamentally. And I think is sharing things in a way with people that still shows, even if I'm delivering very bad news to you, I'm doing it compassionately. And I will do everything I can to help you through something, but I'm extending invitation for you to meet me halfway. And it's doing
Hmm.
it in a way that really makes someone feel like, even in a tough conversation, you're doing that to help support their success. You're not doing it to blow them up or make them feel belittled or stupid, but that you really fundamentally believe that if they want to, they can figure things out. And that as a result, that there's great trust and rapport between those two parties.
Yeah, I've actually read a little bit of the book to my team this morning in our team sync, and I was reading about genuine kindness is not about being soft and gooey. Hence to your comment there, it's not about being lenient or avoiding accountability. You should still hold people accountable. You have very high expectations and communicate them in a way that inspires people to respect you. So it's in that way of respect. And then I also like towards the end of the book on page 60, rather how you treat people and as you get your work done, it's about directness, transparency, and clear communication. And so when I was talking with my team this morning, I was thinking like this is how we will continue to operate. We have a high level of transparency and respect and trust, but for those teams who don't, that might be uncomfortable, even just hearing those words. And so for those who might see that as uncomfortable, where do you start? I know in the book you talk about 4 pillars of kindness. So where do we start?
Yeah, I think the first pillar or condition is really, it's self-awareness and a willingness to really, use it some form of assessment instrument, or if nothing else, just have open conversations with people and get feedback. Use a 360 tool, but really getting data that lets you know how you're being experienced, both where you're being really successful and enjoyed and that people look forward to you, and those times when who you are really pisses people off, and
Hmm.
and makes you like, why does Tom always do that? That really annoys me. But really being open and willing to hear that and to process it and see what it tells you. What does it say that you should do, to continue doing, to reinforce and leverage, maybe more than you've already been? And what do you need to manage and maybe even in some cases suppress, so that people have a better experience with you, that you don't get in your own way. I think that the transparency piece is then, once you know that about yourself, being willing to share that with people.
Hmm.
There was another leader I worked with he was into Myers-Briggs, and he, knew his type. And he would, anytime someone joined his team, he would write them a letter that he'd give them on the first day when they would meet. And he'd start out by saying, "Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I think it's important that we get to know each other. And I want you to know about me, both my good things and my difficult things, because I will need your help in reminding me or helping me recognize when I'm succeeding and when I'm not being helpful." And then he proceeded to use his type to explain more about himself. And he would literally give this letter to people on their first day. And I don't know if that works for everybody. I think a few people joined and got that letter and were like, "What is this? I've never seen this before." But the end result is that he kind of set the stage. He kind of said, "I'm open. Here I am, all my good things, all my warts and problems. And I want you to know this about me, and help me continue to learn and grow as a leader by talking to me about this when you see these things, both the good things and the difficult things." So
Hmm.
I think, a lot of leaders, I think, believe they need to be, infallible, that they need to be perfect, that they know that they can solve anything. And I think that's not true of any human on this planet. So, there may be some people that have kidded themselves into thinking that, but I think most of us know we all make mistakes and stumble sometimes, and that we don't know everything. And I think so. The self-awareness is really understanding yourself, and then willing to be transparent about that, and let others, learn from your own reflection about who you are and how that influences you in terms of how you work or how you lead teams.
Yeah, I think there's a saying I heard once, like if you point a finger at someone, you've got more fingers pointing back at yourself than you do outwards, and that goes along the lines of that self-awareness. And so, I've come across leaders and may or may not have been a leader in this place of, well, no, I don't want your feedback, or I don't like the feedback you're giving me, and I can come up with, three or four different counter arguments to that feedback. So how do you become willingness to accept the feedback? And I think that's a struggle I know for myself and people in my circle and friends. Like, how do we come to a place where, yes, okay, give me the feedback, and because I genuinely want this.
I think another condition or pillar in the model of genuine kindness is listening to understand. And I think that, that Covey has written that we are more wired to listen to respond than we are to understand. So if someone comes to you and wants to share something with you, especially if it's feedback about you, and we all probably get a little defensive when we're getting feedback, especially if it's not, if it's critical or constructive. I think it's really, practicing the ability to open up, and to really suspend any assumptions you have, or any emotions that are interfering with your ability to hear what the person is saying, and just, say, "Tell me more about that. What's going on? What examples do you have for me? How did you experience that?" And I think it's just being a good consumer of it. It doesn't mean in the end that you're going to agree with everything. But if someone has the courage to come to you and give you feedback that is honest and respectful, they're not doing it in most cases to blow you up. They're doing it because they want you to succeed. They
Hmm.
want you to be a great boss, a great colleague, good team member. And if we could wrap our heads around that and assume that was the intention of feedback, less so than it was to derail us or just criticize us and leave us there, helpless, I think that we would be potentially better consumers of it. I know I try and do that, and I'm not always successful, but I find that, most people who have something they want to tell me are wanting to help me, and they're there to support my success. And I
Hmm.
believe that. And therefore anything they would share with me would be incredibly valuable in terms of my operational equation and how I want to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it's moving from that place of defensiveness to that place of curiosity. I love that. Tell me more.
It's, a colleague of mine observed me early on in my consultancy facilitating a training class, spent the whole day in the class, and took copious notes. And that evening class ended and we went home. And the next morning I got up about 5:30 to go for my morning walk. And I had received an email from her at about 12:30 that night. And it was her transcribed notes. And so I thought, oh, this is great. I thought, wow, she stayed up late and did this. That's really wonderful. And I opened it up and it was rough. It was tough. There wasn't a lot of praise. There was a lot of criticism and it wasn't terribly well written. But it was, about 10 pages typed up, single
Wow.
space, inch margins. And I got through about one page of it and then said, this is garbage. It really pissed me off. And I got caught up on how she had done it. And so I walked away from it, went out and did my walk. And as often happens on walks, you do a lot of reflection. I intentionally leave my iPhone at home when I walk in the morning and just so I have time to myself. And I thought, well, why would she have stayed up till 12:30 in the morning if this wasn't important to her? There was something she felt really urgency about that she wanted to share this with me. If she didn't care about me, she would have probably waited a week to get it to me, but she didn't. She turned it around really fast. So I got a new attitude essentially and went back and read through all 10 pages. And there were some nuggets in it. There were things that were really helpful to me and some things I didn't agree with, but I would have missed all the goodness of that if I couldn't have adjusted my mindset and really believe that she was doing it to help me be successful.
That's a great example, right? We read something and then all of a sudden we start making up the narrative in our own minds and then miss some of the goodness that's already in there. But that kind of goes into that second, like you said, that second condition or second pillar of responding versus reacting. And I think that's such a key thing to remember as, whether we're leading in our homes or with friends or in our workplaces is
Mhm.
to pause and figure out how to respond rather than react.
Yeah, I think it's just being really, really, it's just being very, you know, you got to understand first before you can respond. And I find that a lot of instances, and we did research and talked to people in my own experiences, where someone acted cruelly to someone else at work was usually because they blew up in the moment and they had partial information. And there were probably other things going on that kind of at that moment, that was the straw that broke the camel's proverbial back. But it's really, being thoughtful and really understanding first what's happening and then responding to it and then, reaching a conclusion. In some cases, maybe saying, I need to think about this. Let me step away.
Hmm.
Especially if you're an I on the Myers-Briggs, you want to do that naturally anyway. So if you're an E, being careful that you don't respond in that moment as you're probably inclined to do. And that all goes, again, it's how the self-awareness, listening to understand, responding versus reacting, kind of how they all kind of come together in this chain of process to achieving this state.
Yeah, I still remember the first time I reacted versus responded, and I won't go into the details, but I learned a valuable lesson in that, and the hurt of between myself and another colleague, and we repaired the relationship. But I had to talk with my boss and had to talk with HR about it, and and
Yep.
um, I let the stress of my entire everything going on in life, and somebody came in and yeah, I reacted into my office and I reacted versus responded and said, didn't say, tell me more or, hey, I just need a minute before I respond. So we've kind of talked about those two pillars, the self-awareness, willingness, responding and reacting. What are the other two pillars and how does it all fit in?
Well, so the other pillars, finally, I'll actually go to the last one a little bit and talk about accountability.
Hmm.
Because you had asked me before today about, accountability, and that has a bad connotation and is negative. And I kind of chuckled when you posed that question to me and we were corresponding, but I actually think lack of accountability is the biggest negative. And I think that, in doing this, if an organization or a leader is going to decide that they need to be different and that there is a more civil way of engaging with each other at work and being kinder to each other and being respectful, then they have to be accountable to demonstrating that behavior, and they have to be accountable to holding others to that standard. So it's really, it's not, I have seen over the years, many organizations come together with a list of operating principles or cultural values, and respect might be in there, kindness, etc. But when you go out into the trenches with them, they're anything but what they're saying they're going to be. And that they don't really pay attention to that because they're, if they can get a result, even if it's scorched earth to get to that point, if they got that result, they're going to excuse the scorched earth behavior. So part of the accountability piece is really saying, nope, that's not the right way to get it done. And really being able to say, this is what we're about, and holding people accountable to that. In the book, I talk about Neilman, the guy who founded, the JetBlue, and he's got a new airline now, Breeze. He's a brilliant, airline entrepreneur, and he's just a genius marketing guy. But he had one airline he had started early on in his career, Southwest bought it. And so they brought him on board because there is this entrepreneur and this will be great. And, I have been to Southwest headquarters. I've toured that. I've met with their training and development people. Neilman was not a cultural fit to that. He was not going to work the way that they felt was important and that they wanted to live by. And they ultimately parted ways with him. They kind of shook hands and, they cast him adrift. He's now potentially going to become, he started JetBlue. He created a competitor airline. But to them, it wasn't so much what he could do or the result he could get. It was more about how he would. So the accountability piece is to a large extent, if an organization is going to say, yeah, we want to do this, but then they're going to go back and not hold people accountable to the standard or to whatever their standards happen to be that they decide on, then it's kind of a hollow sort of thing. It has no meaning. It doesn't have the impact that I would hope it would. So I think that's a big piece of what I'm, have been talking about. The other one is authenticity. And this is, there are some people that I've worked with or I've seen in the workplace who are being nice to someone, but it's not because that they're doing it because they just genuinely want to be nice and kind. They're doing it fundamentally to manipulate someone or to blow smoke at them and to schmooze them because they want a particular answer or they want their commitment to something. And so authenticity fundamentally is that you come into this and you're doing this because you really believe in it. You know that we are a polarized world and that there's got to be a better way to live and work with each other and exist. And you're not in this because it's some lever you're pulling to get a result or to earn a big bonus, that you're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the civil way to approach other people and be respectful towards them and demonstrate kindness and compassion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that level of accountability, and I think, at least for me and some of the places that I've worked, it's used in that negative way. This is how I'm going to hold you accountable. But I flipped it, even in a recent article I wrote about clarity, responsibility, and accountability, this is how we're going to hold each other accountable. And as a leader, within an organization, or if we're leading a team, or you're sitting at the top of that organization, leading from that place and being held accountable. So if you say you're going to be transparent and you're hiding things, is that kind? Are you being kind to your people, to yourself, to the organization, your shareholders? No. And if we go back to the definition of kindness, it's not just that, fluffy, let's pat each other on the back. It's communicating directly. It's being transparent and having that best interest of everyone else in mind as well.
Yep. It's really important. I had to fire someone once, and this was 20 some years ago when I was an HR director for a telecom company. And she's one of my best friends to this day. And when I was writing this book, she and I had a long conversation. I said, how did we get through that? Most people think if you fire somebody, you probably aren't going to stay friends with them. There are bad feelings and it's never ends well, but yet we've had this rich friendship ever since. And she said, it was the way you chose to go about it. She said, I was in the wrong job. You were talking to me and you were letting me know and you were being supportive of me, but I knew in the end, I probably wasn't in the right job. And she was right. But she said, you were transparent. You were not, you weren't fluffy and insincere, but you were respectful. and you were supportive. Even when I was leaving, you were genuine in asking how you could help me and what you could do to support my transition to what came next. And she went on and she has had and still has a great HR career, but she's doing other things than what she was doing in that role.
Hmm.
And, so it's possible to hold people accountable, even in the most, severe act of accountability, which is saying this isn't working out and we need to part ways. But there's a way you can do it. And, I'm living evidence, and as she and I are, that you could do it and still be kind and helpful to someone and allow it to end well.
Yeah. Again, kindness isn't just being nice and doing that nice thing. Like letting somebody go, that's hard. I've only had to do it a few times in my career, and it doesn't make for a great day for all parties involved. Yeah.
But particularly in that extreme act, how you do it, if you do it with grace and consideration and respect and are fully appreciative and empathetic to the enormity of that decision and the impact on the recipient, I think you're doing the right things. And a lot of people don't do it well. I mean, I remember that George Clooney movie where the companies would hire him to basically tell people they were being laid off. And I thought, oh my God. And there are organizations that do that,
Hmm.
they didn't make that up. That actually is a business out there, or it was. So I think what a cruel and disrespectful way to render such a significant decision to somebody. But it's not just how you part ways with people. It's more importantly, and most of the time, about how you work with them and support their growth and development. And so that at the end, they really feel safe with you and as a leader, and that you're doing the things that, that they know they're held accountable, and that if they miss something, they'll be supported in figuring it out, that you're not going to just come to them and yell at them and tell them good luck. And if you can't do this, I'm going to fire you. That's the complete opposite of what this book is about and the way to approach it.
It absolutely is. And the opposite side of that is, if we have people on our teams that we're not giving feedback to, that we're allowing people in our organizations to float, if you will, to float through the organization without giving that feedback directly, but maybe giving that feedback to other people, or giving that feedback to, if you lead a team, you talk to HR about it. No, like I would ask people today to stop and reflect and figure out how to respond in a caring way, in a kind way, to someone who isn't performing. And that when we don't have those honest conversations, it's actually a disservice to the people in our organizations.
It's tough. And, my colleague in England, before becoming a consultant and focused on employee engagement, he actually worked for a large pharmacy company in the United Kingdom. And he was a regional manager, and he was very good at what he did, but he was not pleasant to work for. And he told me this story, and it really struck me. His boss one day bought him a journal and told him to go to Costa Coffee and sit there and write about what he had just done. And so he was kind of forced into reflection, but he kind of took off for him. And as he was writing down what happened, he began to realize the impact he had had, which was not what he really wanted to achieve, and that there was a different way for him in life, which ultimately led to him doing what he does. But I think it's really having those reflective moments, really kind of thinking about yourself and understanding yourself as a first step in this whole journey.
So, as someone is, listening to our podcast today, whether they're on their way to work, on their way home, wherever they're listening to this, where does somebody start? So I know we talked about self-awareness and willingness, responding versus reacting, authenticity and accountability. So if I'm sitting here and say, I think I'm a kind person, but I just don't know, where do I start? How do I start on this journey for becoming a genuinely kind person?
I'm a big advocate of assessment tools. So Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder, emotional intelligence, the DISC, there's the culture index. There are a lot of different things out there that you can do that I think are very valid instruments, that if you respond genuinely, using that term again, when you take the assessment, if you're being honest, I think you can get some really powerful information for starters. And then, a great thing that I encourage my coaching clients to do is when they get their assessment results is share the report with people that really know them and ask them, don't preface it by saying, I don't think this is right, or just say, hey, would you read this and then tell me what you think? And the first time I did Myers-Briggs, I sent it to a woman I'd worked with up in Seattle in the past. And I sent it to her. I said, just tell me what you think. And I waited, and about an hour later, I got this email back that started off with, OMG, this is so you. And then she proceeded to give me examples. And some of the examples were affirming and showed how my type helped me. And then there were some examples about how it got in my way. So I think it's a great process. I think leaders or even individuals can do to learn more about themselves by first getting some kind of a assessment completed that, has this information, and then picking out people that really know them and who they trust and ask them to read it and to come back and provide their reactions to it. It also happens to be, it's a great way of demonstrating transparency.
Yeah, which falls right in the definition of genuine kindness.
Yep.
I love that you talked about assessments. I've done a number of them in the past, and I remember taking one assessment, and my first reaction was, I don't agree with this. The assessment's wrong. And as I started unpacking it, I found myself becoming quite emotional about the results. What I had thought, what I had thought about myself was different than what the assessment was saying. And it took a lot of reflection, but I think it helped heighten my self-awareness. And so, we'll put a link to a number of assessments in the show notes as well. And
Great.
For those who are interested in where to get started, but it's such an important thing as we think about the future of our workplaces, as we think about our diverse workplaces. We're moving into, and we are into this era of hybrid and remote, and people from different parts of the world that we may have never worked with before. And approaching that with kindness and curiosity will just set you up for success.
Yeah, it's a viable alternative, but it requires commitment and it requires practice, because if it's something you haven't done or haven't experienced, the first time you do it, it's going to feel a little awkward. But I'm an optimist. I believe, and I also believe things have to change. We're just at a point in the world where the old way of doing things isn't going to cut it, or it's going to take us into a very bad direction. And but I think we can still turn the ship around and find a better way to work with each other. And the book is meant to offer just a pragmatic model and how to think about it.
Well, thanks again, Thomas, for coming on. Like I said at the beginning, I've really enjoyed reading this book. For those who are listening, the book is called Genuine Kindness: Achieving Results Through Trust and Understanding. It is short, it's impactful. It, at the end of every chapter, has an action plan. So there's no room to say, how do I do this? It's packed full of action to move you into this journey. So thanks again for coming on, Thomas. And yeah, for those who are listening, please head to peoplemanagingpeople.com. Leave us your comment. We'd love to hear from you. Also connect with me on LinkedIn or through various social platforms. So with that, Thomas, have a great day.
You too, Tim. Thanks a lot for having me. It was my pleasure.
All right. Take care.